afternoon. It's Wednesday, 11th of May, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and with me, Justin Walker.
Hello, Mike. Yes, hello.
Let's get straight to it. Justin, we mentioned this a couple of days ago, the Commonwealth Corruption Conference. The Commonwealth, is there any corruption in the Commonwealth?
No. None at all.
None at all.
None at all.
Well, there's so little that they're talking about it, and we mentioned this a couple of days ago. As I say, here's the sort of brochure for it today. They're running a live stream. It's all really good, and of course, yesterday we had David Cameron commenting on his conference tomorrow, and he said that Nigeria was fantastically corrupt. The hypocrisy is fantastic, isn't it? But anyway. The Nigerian president was at the Commonwealth conference today, and on his way into that, he said, well, actually, Nigeria is fantastically corrupt, but I don't want an apology from David Cameron. I want a return of the assets, thank you very much.
Which is a brilliant one-liner.
Absolutely, absolutely. So they were at he was at the Tackling Corruption conference. He was in the first plenary this morning, and there was a BBC reporter there, James Langdale, and the first question he asked was, he began by saying, when the Prime Minister told the Queen, and as soon as those words were out, the entire audience was booing him and hissing him and basically telling him to shut up, which he wouldn't do. So he asked this question, which was promptly ignored by everybody, including the chairperson, who went on to the next comment. Now, one of the other people on the plenary session was Matt Hancock, who, of course, is Paymaster General and Cabinet Office Minister. And he said that Britain was really, really brilliant, really leading the world here, where he was crowing about the UK's upcoming Register of Beneficial Ownership, which he says will become public next month for the first time. And he says that we will be the first country in the G20 to achieve that. That the British overseas territories are going to do the same. And he said, but why this summit is so important is that making that progress in the UK alone is not enough. We have to make sure that the whole world moves together. So we're preparing to take a lead and stick our neck out. And in these changes, if you act alone, sometimes you can become a problem. It can become a problem. What we need to make sure is that the whole world moves together. So this is all about one world governance. And if you want a little bit of background to this, do have a look at the One World Governance series on the UK Column website, because these articles, one of the sort of central questions that we're asking through these series of articles is which is going to be the chosen path to one world governance? Is it going to be the United Nations, or is it going to be the Commonwealth? And the Queen, who we'll come on to in a moment, has mentioned in the past that, of course, the Commonwealth is a third of the population of the planet. It's a fairly significant pressure group, and that is one of the ways that it's going to be managed.
I just wondered, do you think the Bank for International Settlements and the whole entire central banking system was on the guest list to coming to this conference?
No, they weren't.
No. Okay, just giving it a bit of thought.
Yes, so it is clearly there to deal with corruption, Justin. Yeah. Well, one of the other things that Matt Hancock mentioned was that that Nigeria, he was very pleased that the Nigerian government had decided to join the Open Government Partnership. Now, we highlighted this organisation a couple of days as well. And just to remind you, this is the organisation. It's kind of a civil society organisation, and civil society, of course, is one of the sort of aspects of the embryonic world governance infrastructure. So he was really pleased that Nigeria has agreed to join this particular part of it. And of course, this organisation, yet another one funded by George Soros, the Foreign Commonwealth Office. And as I say, if the Nigerian president, who seems to be trying to do something about corruption, if he thinks that joining this organisation is going to help, I think he's got another thing coming. Now, of course, Britain is taking the lead on corruption, and this is highlighted by the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, which has launched a consultation to review the MP's expenses with regard to so-called business costs. Because they have discovered that on average, now this is on average, MPs are paying their relatives £5,600 more than they're paying other staff. So I think you've got a view on MPs employing family members in general.
Well, I'm probably a little bit out of sync here, but if I was an MP, and say for argument's sake that I ended up in Parliament and I was exposing the global system, I wouldn't necessarily trust everybody wanting to be employed by me. I would just be feeling a bit uneasy. I might be tempted to take on board a family member who I could trust, but I think the first thing I would do is pay them only half what a normal salary would be, so I could not be accused of feathering my nest and basically stealing the taxpayers' money. So there is a slight argument to say that it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a loyal family member watching your back, basically. But if I did do that, they would only be on half the salary, so nobody could throw saying that I was feathering my nest. But I think it's highly unlikely I'm going to become an MP, so it's all academic.
I thought you were going to become king.
No, Prime Minister, oh boy.
Okay.
Prime Minister.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, anyway, so pay of such connected parties has also risen at twice the rate of other staff, according to IPSA. So we wait to see what comes out of that consultation. Now, of course, we've had a couple of so-called open mic incidents in the last day or two, and this was the greatest one of them all, because this is our beloved Queen remarking about what she really thinks of the Chinese.
Very rude, very rude.
Yes. So this on the left-hand side here is Metropolitan Police Commander Lucy Dorsey, and she told the Queen that she had been in charge of overseeing the security arrangements during President Xi's visit last year. And the Queen apparently said to her, "Oh, bad luck." And then it went on that because Commander Dorsey said that she had been seriously undermined by the Chinese. In other words, they didn't trust her to look after them. Do you blame them, really? Seriously undermined by the Chinese, but she managed to hold her own and remain in command. Right. She told the Queen, "I was the gold commander, so I'm not sure whether you knew, but it was quite a testing time for..." And then the Queen said that she did know. And then Dorsey continued, "It was the point they walked out of Lancaster House and told me that the trip was off that I felt." And the Queen said they were very rude to the ambassador, very rude. And Dorsey replied, "They were. It was very rude and undiplomatic, I thought." Now, what was really amusing about this whole thing was that a Buckingham Palace spokesperson later said, "We do not comment on the Queen's private conversations." Well, if you've actually seen the video clip, it's pretty clear that the camera was in their faces.
This was an embedded operation.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So this is the Queen's private conversation.
There's an agenda.
So
yeah.
just as with Cameron's comments, there is absolutely an agenda at work here. Yes. What can we say? Anyway, we're dealing with corruption, and that's all we need to worry about.
That's all we need to worry about.
Right. Economic news then. The Eurozone recovery wilts as sugar rush fades, deflation lurks. This is according to Ambrose Evans-Pritchard. He says the Eurozone's short-lived recovery is already losing steam as stimulus fades and deep problems resurface, raising fears of yet another false dawn and a potential deflation trap if there is any external shock over the coming months. Industrial output fell 1.3% in Germany and 0.3% in France in March as manufacturing stalled, confounding expectations for robust expansion. The only people that are expecting robust expansion are nutters, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Economists, in other words, yeah. So the relapse in a string of countries suggests that flash estimates of 0.6% GDP growth in the first quarter were too optimistic and may have to be cut. He went on to say there are plenty of trouble spots in sight. Italy is struggling to manage a banking crisis as bad. Debts reach 19% of lenders' balance sheets, while Spain and Portugal are both in political turmoil and flouting EU deficit rules, leaving it unclear whether the European Central Bank could legally back them in a crisis under its rescue machinery. And again, he goes on, well, he's quoting other people who are going on to blame this all on sovereign crises, sovereign debt. And of course, all this sovereign debt, aside from being completely unnecessary, Justin, is actually as a result of bailing out the banks, and it's got nothing to do with sovereign any kind of sovereign commitment at all.
I was down on the beach of the Dog at Slapton Sands, and on the horizon I actually saw a container vessel full. Now, that means one ship is at least moving.
But what was it full of?
Well, that's another good question. But all my contacts suggest that if we get through May without some sort of collapse happening, we'll be
very lucky.
Very lucky.
Well, Ambrose Pritchard pointing out what's going on in Europe, but in fact the industrial sector has fallen again in the UK as well. The FT pointing out a 0.4% fall. We're not manufacturing anything, so therefore we cannot produce our way out of this.
Well, I was amazed today. I showed you there was 100 new tanks being done for the British Army, and they're being manufactured in Spain with Swedish steel. That was, these are,
We're closing our steel plants.
Exactly, we're closing our steel plants, and, we make the finest tanks in the world, but apparently Spain's got to produce these.
But this is what being a member of the European Union does.
Absolutely. So there's going to be more to that story, possibly, so we'll see what develops.
Now, you have quite a long history in the local press.
Yes, arena. I do. 12 years, yes.
For?
The Westmoreland Gazette, regional newspaper looking after the Lake District, Yorkshire Dales and the Vale of Lune.
Right, so you will be interested in this story then, Justin, because this is George Osborne writing in Politics Home, and he's saying there's no more precious freedom than freedom of the press.
Yes, okay.
There's no more precious freedom than freedom of the press. As power is devolved out of Whitehall, it is vital that local media is given a chance to thrive. For centuries, in some cases, local newspapers have been both training grounds for journalists and the hearts of their communities. Many of those now holding us politicians to account as part of the parliamentary press pack started their careers in local media, and the regional lobby is still an important presence in Westminster. But the truth is these sources of news are fast disappearing. According to the National Union of Journalists, 150 local titles have closed since 2008 as advertising revenues have declined. In the last 12 months, newspapers that have been lost include the Surrey Herald, Sheffield Gazette and the Reading Post. From next year, I'm going to introduce a business rate discount for local newspapers in England. It will mean a £1,500 saving a year on the cost of the tax paid by local newspaper offices. Now, the question is, Justin, why are local newspapers failing in this way? Is it because they're being bought up by huge corporations that are shutting them down?
I'm going to say this because I'm no longer employed by them, but the Westmoreland Gazette, good local newspaper, been around since 1818. It's very much a focal point of the community. Is owned by NewsQuest, which owns about 70, 80 something newspapers in Britain, local newspapers, including the Plymouth Herald down here. And then in turn, NewsQuest is owned by Gannett, which I think is around about the 5th biggest media empire in America. It's a big bird in America. And basically we are lent upon, and I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, that my journalist friends at the Westmoreland Gazette, I think, will nod their heads in agreement when I say this, but basically journalism there and in all the local papers is all about copy and paste. In other words, you get a press release from local government or from a charity or from whatever, and we just haven't got the people now to basically rewrite it. We haven't got the people to investigate what the local council are up to or whatever, or, and so, it is just a parish notice board, and we've lost the ability to question. So it's very much a compliant local paper now, local press, not a vibrant local press, it's compliant.
So when George Osborne says a vibrant local press is more crucial to our democracy, what he's talking about is PR work for the big society.
Absolutely, and you couldn't have, in fact, when I pointed out to my colleagues about what was going on in Patterdale, a little village up the road on Oldswater, where you could see outsiders are taking over the parish council and very strange decisions were being made, and this, something was not right. My friends just looked at me and said, well, we haven't got the resources to do anything about it. We can't investigate. We haven't got the people.
Well, the hypocrisy in this story ended with the pretty much towards the end when he said, show me a country that controls its press and I'll show you a government that controls its people. Okay, so
are we supposed to keep a straight face at this?
Well, absolutely. And just to, demonstrate the hypocrisy, of course, they didn't get their chance to control the press a couple of years ago, but that absolutely was the intention.
Yeah.
I believe it's still the intention, and we shall hold Mr. Osborne to account, I think, for saying what he just said.
I agree. Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's move on. Syria. Now, the Syria support group is co-chaired by the Russian Federation and the United States, and I chose the Russian press release on this because it's more likely to be truthful. But they have issued a joint statement reaffirming commitment to the ceasefire in Syria. They say the co-chairs have re-emphasized the terms of the ceasefire with field commanders on all sides, especially in Aleppo, Eastern Ghouta, Latakia, where we're determined to improve and sustain the ceasefire. They said they demanded that parties cease any indiscriminate attacks on civilians, including civilian infrastructure and medical facilities. And the Russian Federation will work with Syrian authorities to minimize aviation operations over areas that are predominantly inhabited by civilians or parties to the cessation. And they said that they are committed to a shared understanding of the threat posed, the territory controlled by ISIL and al-Nusra Front, and to consider ways to deal decisively against the threat posed by ISIL and al-Nusra Front to Syria and international security. So that was what the Russians and the Americans had to say about this. Matt Rycroft, who is the ambassador to the United Nations, had a slightly different take on it. And he's really commenting on what's going on in Aleppo. And he's saying that to support the effort for peace in Aleppo, the United Kingdom is today proposing a Security Council statement that condemns the violence in Aleppo and calls for an urgent end to the brutality. We cannot choose to do nothing in the face of such barbarity. To do so would be tantamount to collusion with the very forces destroying Aleppo. And of course, the hint was that that is Russia and the Syrian government. But as we pointed out yesterday, that destruction is mainly coming from al-Nusra Front and pro-Saudi forces. So that is the British point of view, which is somewhat different to the American. It is interesting, Justin, that at the moment America seems to have two foreign policies. We have the foreign policy run by Ash Carter, which is basically to bang the war drums as hard as we can, which is driven by Barack Obama, and we have the policy of John Kerry, which seems to be a bit more reticent and a bit more sort of conciliatory.
I'm looking forward to when Trump becomes president, because he wants dialogue with the Russians and he wants to sort the problem out once and for all.
Well, that's this 5 minutes. He may have changed his mind
that's also,
by tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
But later on, we'll be talking about Hillary.
Ah, yes.
This is
charming
her,
lady.
Her new name, Hillary. But just before we do that, I'll just remind everybody, since we're speaking about Syria, that Vanessa Billy is speaking not only at AV7 this weekend, but in Frome on Tuesday next week, which is May the 17th. And that's at the Wheat Sheaves in Bath Street in Frome. Please get along to that if you possibly can. If you're not able to go to AV7, this is a pretty important subject, because at the end of the day, what she's talking about, she's focusing on the white helmets, of course, in Syria, but what we're talking about is the role of NGOs, tax-free foundations, Soros, this whole infrastructure, this whole civil society infrastructure, which is driving for one world governance. And if you want to understand what's going on geopolitically, you've got to understand the players in this area. Okay, China, the Chinese, the Spratly Islands and so on. These islands in the South China Sea, which are causing so much controversy with the Americans at the moment. Well, the Americans continue to poke a stick in at the Chinese, and so the US has driven a warship, the USS William P. Lawrence, within 12 nautical miles of the Fairy Cross Reef, and Well, the defense spokesman for the US, Bill Urban, said that it was all fine. It was just a challenge to maritime claims by China, so that's okay. The Chinese, of course, said that this was the Americans driving their ships into Chinese waters, and what the heck did they think they were doing? But this is the Ash Carter side of the foreign policy debate here, where we just incite war as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, it's to me, as I said, I find this American foreign policy, when you think they've got bases all around the world and they had to find a reason for keeping those bases, and of course that's when the war on terror emerged, and they still think themselves the world's policemen, but of course they are the globalist policemen. That's the key to everything. They are acting under orders from the globalists as opposed to what's in the interest of the sovereignty of the United States.
Well, Paul Craig Roberts has it absolutely hit the nail on the head here. A dire future. Do you remember, he says, do you remember all the hopes Americans had for Obama when we elected him to his first term? Painful memories. He betrayed the voters on every one of his promises. There was no change except for the worst, as Obama went on to become one of the most vicious war criminals in world history. Despite his horrific record, we re-elected him, not only to have US economic policy turn against the people in order to bail out at our expense the mega banks and the 1%. Now Obama is coercing Asia and Europe to turn the governments of their countries over to rapacious corporations empowered by TPP and TTIP to subordinate all interests to their profits. And then he goes on to say, if we end up with Hillary, as he's calling her, neither the US nor the world will survive the mistake. She will be the last American president. Hillary has compromised with secret agendas, and secret agendas lead to conflict and war. With a crazed President Hillary, who declared Russian President Vladimir Putin, the world's leading peacemaker, to be the new Hitler, with crazed American generals who declare Russia to be an essential threat to the United States, an existential threat to the United States, and with the insane neoconservatives back in the saddle, determined to impose American hegemony on the rest of the world, Hillary's election will terminate life on Earth. You couldn't really put it more bluntly than that, could you?
I still can't understand why the alternative media hasn't... how many skeletons, literally skeletons, are in the Clintons' cupboard? The people who have died mysteriously around them. I mean, it's an incredible... the Clinton story is just in your face. Now, the only good news is that the guy who's standing against her, I can't remember his name now, you'll have to help me out.
Bernie Sanders?
That's the guy. Bernie Sanders actually won one of the caucuses yesterday.
Yes.
Was it West Virginia or somewhere? Something like that.
And sure.
He's not that far behind. Surely, to goodness, somebody can just pull the rug from under this bloody woman. To give Bernie Sanders a chance?
Well, many people are asking the question, will she be indicted over the email scandal over Benghazi and so on? But the fact of the matter is she is being protected by the FBI at the moment.
And the globalists.
So there is no possibility of that happening whatsoever. And you can see that any time that issue has been brought up, the arrogance in her response is spectacular.
She knows she's protected.
She knows she's protected.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Philip Hammond is in Gibraltar today, which is great news. He said the UK's support for Gibraltar and the Gibraltarian people is firm and unconditional. It's reassuring to see a large Royal Navy vessel moored in Gibraltar, and it will be a pleasure to meet some of the UK servicemen and women who work tirelessly to safeguard the territory's sovereignty. So we're there safeguarding the territory's sovereignty, and we're using a large Royal Navy vessel moored in Gibraltar. What kind of vessel do you think that might be?
Ocean survey ship with one little pop gun at the front and possibly an unarmed helicopter on the back. Possibly, I'm only guessing. Something that will upset the Spaniards anyway.
Yes, well, indeed. So earlier on, he tweeted out, "Good morning from Gibraltar, visited Royal Navy RFA Mounts Bay, preparing for its next mission."
Right.
A reassuring sight. No, you weren't right.
No, I wasn't right. No,
because it's a car ferry.
Oh, With tanks on board?
No.
No.
No, it is Royal Fleet Auxiliary. It is there to deliver goods and so on. So this is the big ship which is going to protect. Now I want to say I'm not by any means making fun of the people that man this ship at all.
Well, they will have one or two guns between them.
I am making fun of Philip Hammond because
absolutely,
because he's an idiot and to suggest that this ship is going to protect the sovereignty of Gibraltar.
I'm going to let you into a little secret. In 1977 and in 1980, I did a two-week tours in Gibraltar in the Territorial Army, helping defend the Rock against 10,000 Spanish. I think I had 28 men under my command. But the point is, the Navy was in town and there were 9 warships on one occasion and 7 on the other. We actually did have a bit of a Navy in those days. But this is just a joke, isn't it? It's a joke.
So actually somebody in the chat box is asking, is this to collect the tanks?
What?
From Spain?
Oh, from Spain?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, very good point. Well, yeah, we're on the ball today, aren't they?
You're not.
No, I'm not, no.
Okay, look, that's it for today. I'm sorry it's a bit of a short news.
Yeah, no, that's
fine. It's just us today. David Scott, I believe, will be with us tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we'll make up for the shortness of today. And the other thing to say is that I completely forgot to change the closing title. So this is not Brian Garish.
No. Well, not for now anyway.
Yes, indeed. So, okay, thanks for joining us today. We will see you at the same time tomorrow.
Cheerio.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.